the speakers present their slides. Please submit your questions using the question box feature at any point during the program. As a courtesy, we'd like to remind you that this is a public session and press and other non-member participants are welcome and may be present. In addition, please keep in mind that we will abide by antitrust rules and refrain from discussing pricing, production, or marketing strategies, anything that could be construed as market manipulation. We will not address questions of this nature during this webinar. Like our last two, this session will be recorded. While slides and video excerpts will be available on our website, to access the full recordings in advance, you can complete a quick survey. It is very short and much appreciated. Speaking of surveys, in a few days you will be receiving an email from me. It will give you the opportunity to ask questions and share your company's practices in the areas we're discussing today. Doing so accomplishes two things. One, it lets us know the specific areas people have questions. For example, we learned from the second episode that many people had questions about drain filters. So we may look at developing additional resources focusing on this particular topic. And two, because everybody's operations are different, by collecting as many industry practices as possible, we can build a robust resource that can be more relevant to more companies. Following this survey, we'll compile all the industry practices and resources that we have gathered into a single source and share it with you all. All comments will be handled anonymously unless you state otherwise. So with that over, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Dan Martino is the Senior Director of Administration at Inteplast Group's main manufacturing hub in Loleta, Texas. In addition to sustainability, Dan focuses on logistics, material control, safety, security, and environmental areas at this site spanning more than 500 acres. It is of utmost importance to Dan to fuse sustainability and safety with best lean manufacturing practices, not only at the Loleta site, but as a resource for the 50+ company facilities throughout North America. Having joined Inteplast in 1992, for the past 33 years, Dan has made a happy, grateful home in South Texas with his family. Robert Flores is the Vice President of Sustainability at Berry Global. He is leading the company's efforts to achieve their ambitious Impact 2025 sustainability strategy. This strategy includes 100% of the fast-moving consumer goods packaging that Berry produces to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable, and have an average of 10% recycled content, as well as reducing Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions by 25% versus a 2016 baseline. Robert works with many other global sustainability leaders as part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation New Plastics Economy Working Group and the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. As a longtime recycling advocate, he has been an active member of the Association of Plastic Recyclers since 2009 and has subsequently worked with several other local, national, and global organizations to foster a circular economy. Now, I'd like to hand off to our first speaker today. Dan, you should have control and be able to advance to the next slide. You are also muted.
There we go. All good. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. I'm going to take a quick tour through some of the things that we do regarding warehousing and storage. And the first part of the presentation is actually going to focus on setting the tone. It's similar to safety. There's got to be a culture of sustainability. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that we do at work to help with our employees. This first video, we've got TVs and monitors throughout all of our facilities. And this shows the employees, how we address pellets, how we address sustainability. We've got, I think, almost 400 TVs through our organization. And of course, as a Operation Clean Sweep member and OCS Blue member, we are to promote all of the principles of Operation Clean Sweep. So we're now on this big zero pellet loss initiative in our company. We've always been about containing pellets and everything, but now we love acronyms and all that stuff. So ZPL, and we're pushing that through. And this is an easy way for the employees to be exposed to Operation Clean Sweep, to understand that everything should be contained, et cetera. So This was one of our videos, and I'll flip on to the next one. This is another one, and particularly with all of the issues that are occurring with pellet spills in the Mississippi just happened, South and North Carolina. There's issues all over the place internationally. This video, it's just some pleasant scenes of what our beaches, waterways, oceans, what Mother Nature should look like. And we tie that immediately to the pellet. Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing in terms of managing pellets and of course, just managing waste in general, but specifically where we hone in on this concept of zero pellet loss. And it runs through and control your pellets. So zero pellet loss, that's what we're preaching to every single one of our employees. And what's great is from our #1 person in our company all the way through to every single employee, over 7,000 strong, they get to see this content. And my perspective is we just can't tell an employee, clean up that resin spill and expect them to do it. It needs to be a constant message, and they need to understand why the pellet should be cleaned up. So this is even, we put PowerPoints up for our employees. Why strive for zero pellet, flake, and powder loss? It's good for the environment. It is the law, and it promotes safety and saves costs. I mean, there's some really no-brainer reasons why we want to go this direction. So even for safety, from a slip and fall prevention. So when you're doing the right thing with pellets, of course, you're taking care of your assets, you're taking care of the environment, you're taking care of your employees, you're addressing safety. There's literally no reason why an organization would push back against a program that thwarts pellet control. So anyway, we put that information up there. And anyway, I wanted to set the tone with that information and encourage everyone that's listening today and watching this presentation, joining us, that do your job first to set the culture. Everybody's familiar, we talk about safety culture or business culture, but there is a sustainability culture. And then even drill down a little bit further, there's a pellet culture. And you literally have to establish that pellet culture, particularly as everything changes right now. The pellet was not viewed so in a detailed manner as it is today. For many years, it was wherever the pellet was internationally. Well, now you see that the spills that have occurred and the attention, and even moving to zero pellets on stormwater and wastewater and everything. This is really, really important stuff, and everybody's got to establish that tone first, and then you can start drilling down and establishing procedures. So I'm going to look at how we handle some of our storage areas, and we're a big facility. We've got a lot of applications of pellet handling and pellet storage, and we're going to take a look at it. That's our site in Lolita, Texas, and the 3 blue stars, I just wanted to just highlight that we've got a horseshoe track around the site, couple hundred rail cars. We go through several hundred rail cars a month. So a rail car carrying typically 180 to 200,000 pounds. Can you imagine if we had an issue with rail cars and resin? So obviously a major focus. And that's what we do. We move the cars around the site to the unload stations, and every process along the way, we've got to ensure that that pellet is taken care of. Let me bounce back one slide here. This slide, just to show, get a little bit of feel for how we have to also pay particular attention to warehousing. All the blue stars, and there's actually more locations for storage, but those are specifically locations where we will hold, whether it's 100,000 pounds in boxes or gaylords, super sacks, or 1,000,000 pounds, whatever it might be. Those are all the different locations throughout the site that you can see how pertinent it is to have the appropriate, what we call ZPL culture, zero pellet loss culture, because there are 1,000 opportunities to literally lose containment. So we've got to continuously preach taking care of the pellet. So this slide just shows you all the different silos. We've got, I think, 120, 140 odd silos across the site. So it's the same thing again, regardless of how the pellet is being stored, where the pellet is being stored. We take this full containment, a pellet, if you can think about an individual pellet. Our approach is that one individual pellet should never be uncontained. And when we think about it from that perspective, and if that's the principle in which we operate, then our employees are going to much more naturally handle their silo transfers correctly, their rail car unloading correctly, forklift in a truck. That's obviously, unfortunately, it's a wonderful opportunity to have a pellet leak. But you know, you put a fork through the bottom of a bag or the bottom of a Gaylord, you have a major issue. And if you don't react properly, you fail at ZPL. So we don't hone in initially on the do's and don'ts. We hone in initially on the culture. And once you have that culture established, the employees then become very natural in their response to handling, storing, moving resin. And that's what our goal is. So for our resin warehousing and storage at the facility, about 300 cars a month and around 120 trucks monthly. And we'll take in bulk resin as well. So we interface with the pellet in just about every single manner that you can imagine, whether it's a 25 kg bag or a 2,000 pound super sack, and then 200,000 pounds of resin in cars, or 40,000 pounds of bulk bags, super sacks, or Gaylords in trucks that hold 40,000, 42,000 pounds. So we've got them all. The bulk bags are multiple sizes. And this slide, I'm just sort of letting you know that you need to be able to understand how to treat each one of these instances differently so that you don't wind up with a situation with pellets. And again, the blanket over all of this is that zero pellet loss is the mantra. Zero pellet loss, zero pellet loss. So that really helps us as we go along. So our storage methods, around 10 storage facilities, well over 100 silos. We've got conventional racking that produces some issues with conventional racking for pellet storage. And then also automated warehouse storage, which is an animal unto itself, because if your Gaylord or your bag's not set up properly, you're going to have a complete disaster in the automated warehouse. It's computer controlled, robots, et cetera, et cetera. And if you've got a leaking bag, there aren't necessarily any eyes on it, or a leaking box. So there are many principles that you have to establish for even automated warehouse storage. And then we've got good old floor storage. Everybody has it. A lot of times we take floor storage just as no big deal, as, yep, go ahead, put 40,000 pounds over here and stack it however. We don't do that anymore. There is a science, there is a method that we've got to follow, even for floor storage. You think, nah, just go throw in double stacks and call it good, but we'll cover a little bit of that. But those are our storage methods. So our handling or unloading of resin at any point in time, what I love is that we sort of, in many ways, don't treat it differently than any other item that central warehouse or material control handles. We still apply the same concepts, because what's important to resin is important to everything else. So whether it's motors, earplugs, cleaning supplies, whatever it might be, we've got 15,000 line items in stock. Whatever the item might be, we have these basic principles that just carry right over automatically to resin. It's a pretty commonsensical way or an approach to take. So of course you handle it safely. Never would we want to do or have an employee do anything unsafe. And whether that's a 1,000-pound motor or a 1,000-pound box of resin, we apply all of our safety principles to it. And we don't damage things. Can you imagine if we bought in that motor, whether we dropped the motor or put the fork right through it or whatever, that's an asset, and we just can't be wasting money like that. So it's the same principle. We take care of a box or a bag or a rail car of resin, and then fully accounted for. So if the vendor says there were 5 motors on that pallet and here's your packing slip, we treat the motors, which they could be $10,000 motors, we treat that equally as a pound of resin that can go anywhere from 40 cents to $10 a pound, depending on what it is. We treat it the same exact way, where it's always fully accounted for, locations, it's in good shape, and then we've got control measures in place for quality. So that's built right into our handling. Rail car, bulk truck, bags, boxes, whatever it might be. We are pulling samples, marking up the samples appropriately, getting that to QC, because again, it's an asset. And if we pay for that material, it better be the material that we paid for and spec'd out. So, and then housekeeping. We don't let our motors get dirty. We don't lose them. We don't allow them to be lost in our racking. Resin has to be handled the same way, and particularly in housekeeping area, because if you have resin on your ground or on your floor, whatever it might be, you've got a housekeeping issue. Not only have you lost an asset, you have a housekeeping issue. Not only have you created potentially an environmental issue, if your forklift drives over that resin and drives right outside, you've pulled those pellets outside. That's why housekeeping is one of the major principles in handling resin. And then no impact to the environment. That's a brainer. So if we receive a barrel of hydraulic oil, we're going to treat that just like a box of resin. We are not going to allow environmental, anything negative to happen in the environment with the materials that we pull in. And then that all of our equipment is functioning properly. And particularly with resin, we've got all of our unload stations. We use the forklifts. Auto warehouse, I mentioned, is the robots and the cranes and stackers and everything. The equipment has to be functioning properly, because if it's not, you're going to have a massive issue with a spill also. So we don't drop motors, we don't spill resin. So again, through this webinar, this opportunity, I'm trying to really hammer home that it's a culture. And then on top of that culture, we treat resin in a very comfortable way, just like everything else we do. And by applying those principles, we wind up with a pretty good program with handling resin. So we've got, everybody has the traditional trailer dock and a forklift makeup, and we're going to look at that just a little bit. But you know, sometimes trailers will be backed up and we'll open up the doors, and we've got bags that are already leaning against the doors and a near major incident. So use caution when opening trailer doors. And of course, safety first. Pellet control is obviously incredibly important, but safety first. So just like if we were opening up a trailer full of packaging supplies, we're going to be opening up this trailer that has 1,000-pound boxes that may have shifted during transportation. So be very, very careful about that. No leaking containers. Obviously, if you've got a leak, don't move. I would call the carrier, I would call the shipper, see how you can best handle it. If it's something you can manage, go ahead and take care of it. Make sure you already have your storage location and your plan for how it's going to be stored, because there's two different things. You have storage location, then storage plan. Make sure you have that nailed down while that truck is backing up, or however you're receiving the material, because you don't want to arbitrarily place material anywhere in a facility and then have to move it again. Because every time you move something, you're going to have a potential for a spill. Use the correct equipment to unload. That sounds like a little bit of a silly statement, but I've seen some crazy things over 30 plus years. So use the correct equipment to unload the resin. Be certain that your forks are set appropriately. I used to drive a forklift. I laugh with my team that I'm still the best forklift operator around, but I've probably lost that touch. But I know many of forklift operators that don't get off the forklift, examine their forks relative to the spacing on the pallet, and sure enough, before you know it, they break the pallet, the galer winds up with a leak, et cetera, et cetera. So very, very important. Never, 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 never operate a forklift with obstructed view. So if you're handling double stacks or a super sack, everybody should know this principle with forklift operations. If you can't see moving forward, your full sight, then you have to go in reverse. So that's another topic, but just don't forget that. And then obviously place on solid and even ground, pull your samples, and make sure your load is marked properly. So for storing resin, a lot of the same thing. We store it just like we store our other commodities and spare parts and packaging supplies in stock. Handle it safely, make sure it is clearly identified. If you put it up and you can't see the content labels, you've just made a mistake. So make sure that the containment item is in acceptable condition, whether that's a super sack, 1,000-pound sack, or a Gaylord, whatever it might be. Make sure that the condition of that unit is in good shape. And then make sure that based on the type of material and the particular storage conditions, that you're storing it correctly. You've got stacking requirements, rack weights. We've seen instances at some places where rack weights were exceeded. Can't do it with resin. Make sure nothing is leaking. Because remember, the Operation Clean Sweep is no pellet loss. If there's a leak, stop it immediately and then dispose of it properly. So we deploy that principle. Sure, leaks are going to occur, but our team knows, oh no, that's not a good situation, fix it. And then they fix it, and then they dispose. If we did have any leakage, we will dispose of the resin or be able to use it as long as it's in good shape. So make sure the items remain in a secured marked location and no risk or damage to the storage containers. So floor storage just in general, make sure the weather is not a factor. Some folks literally store resin outside. I've seen it at different visits and everything to customers, and that is not conducive to a good situation. Particularly the bags will deteriorate. The Gaylord boxes will immediately absorb the moisture in the air. They will begin to deteriorate, and before you know it, you will have a spill. So strongly advise against any outdoor storage for resin. Stack according to the packaging instructions. Most vendors will indicate how to stack it. If they don't, you've got to use your best practices in-house. So again, follow all your safety protocol, make sure the load is stable, no chance of leaning. Again, you'll have a massive spill if the top Gaylord falls off the lower one, of course, but you also run a terrible risk from a safety perspective. So be very careful about that. Leave at least a 2-foot aisle in between the rows of products. So I have a little diagram, I'll show that in a minute. 2 rows of product adjacent to each other, leave the aisle space. Don't stack product on the edge of a space where common traffic areas exist. So if you have a very high traffic area with either personnel or forklift, for instance, don't go close to that with double stacks. You're just asking for trouble, so stay away from that area. Damage to containers must be repaired immediately. No ifs, ands, or buts. And our employees now know if they see something leaking, they fix it. Any spills that we may see are also cleaned up immediately. And then remember, always be able to identify the material so that easy tracking. So a very high level look at this, but this is typical arrangements that we do. If we can pyramid stack, we call it a 2x2+1. So pyramid stacking, and you see the little orange dots, that is just indicating where you should have at least identification markers on your storage units right here. This is the 2-foot aisle right in between. So as you're taking inventory or whatever you're doing, you have a good 2-foot aisle space, and you can see the markings on all of the storage units. Likes with likes, obviously, one of the most basic storage principles, likes with likes. And then over here, some of our boxes are 1,800 pounds, for instance, or a ton worth of resin. And we'll do double stack. That's what the vendor will recommend on the box also. So a lot of times we'll just do that. We'll keep it pretty simple. That's traditional 2x2 stacking. But for storage reasons, we love the 2x2+1 because it really helps us take advantage of our floor space. A little bit different, 3x2+2. So we'll go 3 on the floor, double stack, and 2 up the top. You can do that also, but again, the same principle. Leave all your markings on the aisle so that that all works out okay. So, and again, do not exceed storage instructions that are indicated on the packaging unit. So let's look at rack storage real quickly. Conventional racks, we prefer not to store resin in the racks, but we do, of course. Conventional racks, make sure that your horizontal and your vertical restrictions on weight are clearly understood. Do not exceed those. You can YouTube videos of rack systems that have failed and it's catastrophic. So don't exceed weights. Make sure the footprint itself, in terms of depth and width, is appropriate. Minimize the overhang. Make sure you maintain likes with likes again. A forklift operator needs some special skills working in a rack space area. So make sure that that's clearly trained on when you train your forklift operators. And again, obviously, if a pallet is damaged or the container's damaged, don't put it in the rack. Make sure it's fixed, then put it up. It's no problem. And make sure that from the floor space, everything is identifiable either with your barcode scanner or by the eye, whatever the case is, so that inventory and when you're hunting down materials, that you can find that. So this is just a shot that I don't even remember exactly where I got this. It's from a while ago. This picture, as soon as we get back to it here, there we go. Not too bad a storage. A couple things that aren't necessarily good. You can see some of the extra wrap from the auto wrapper that is hanging off the pallet. We don't do that. You can also see the overhang on the top left. That's a little bit excessive. So we don't want to be storing pallets like that either. And then we've got floor storage in front of the rack. That's probably not a preference either. We prefer, particularly in front of racks, that should be empty space. We'll move on to the next slide. For auto warehouse, very similar storage requirements in auto warehouse. This is a pretty cool shot of, our auto warehouse with a nice fisheye lens. It's quite a neat experience to work in that auto warehouse, and you can see how high it goes, and we've got robots working in there. So you can imagine if you failed to put up a pallet of goods, whether it be product or resin or packaging supplies into that auto warehouse, it needs to be perfect. So hopefully any of you that do have auto warehouses, hopefully you all are managing that at point of entry. Don't let a pallet with an issue go into that auto warehouse. On silos, obviously make sure the right car goes to the right silo. All hoses and equipment, they must be fully serviceable. We've had an instance or two where the old Morse coupling blew out, and that unloading pump still blew some resin, and we had a mess to clean up, no doubt. So stay on top of all of your silo related and conveyance equipment where you're doing routine PMs, changing out couplings, whatever it might be, making sure bolts are tight, etc. And of course at the rail car, it's a different scenario there, but make sure you're using catch pans at the rail car. There's no reason for a pellet to hit the ground. We know that unloading or connecting and disconnecting hoses creates an issue or the opportunity for a leak, but make sure you've got that under control. And then with your silos, cone inspections, coupling replacement, filter bag maintenance, and be inspecting your welds. It's very, very important that you stay on top of that. This is a little illustration. We did this at some of our unload stations. One of the products that we make, of course, it's PVC decking. We make that product. So we built a deck, and that is tongue and groove, so pellets cannot go through it. And then we applied this fine mesh to the track where we'll have an unload. The connection to the car comes over this area. And if we have a spill, not too often, but if the pellets do come loose, we will simply just vacuum them immediately right off of the either the stainless steel mesh or the deck. It has worked very well. It's a good opportunity. We know that a lot of facilities, unfortunately, ballast is what was used at the storage area. Preferably, we would not have ballast in these areas. We built a little walkway for the unload operators to walk safely across the track area. And then you can see there's the application. There's one of the decks. Hose is connected. You can see a few pellets right below, and the operator will simply vacuum them up. We've got a nice vacuum unit that works both ways. Either you blow the pellets to a cleanup area, or you can vacuum up the pellets very easily. So we got a little bit creative. Some other folks have done that. There's 30 different ways to contain and make it easier for cleanup, but certainly we need to focus that way. Here's our good friend Kazi. He was, we worked together on this project and getting the vacuum ready. It's a blower, but turn it opposite direction and you can vacuum up the pellets. So anyway, that's just something for you guys to be thinking about. It would be interesting to pursue that on your side. That's how easy it is. The pellets don't go into the gravel. We just vacuum them up, dispose of them properly. Sometimes if the pellets are still in great shape, we can send them over to Reclaim. Reclaim can do their wash program, and then we can reuse the pellets. Otherwise, we, of course, dispose of them properly, and fortunately, we don't have any. So the critical points, and I'm just about done, start with the end in mind, 0 pellet loss. Get your employees hooked up on that concept, and it will be an awesome approach to taking care of the principles of Operation Clean Sweep. They've got to be fully aware of the requirements, avoid the spill, fix the leak, clean up immediately. Each phase of warehousing and storing resin must be controlled. And then what I love, the concept is 100% containment. And if you can get your employees to imagine never having a pellet uncontained, that's what we always talk to them first. And it's a neat concept. So ZPL to everybody, no exceptions, 0 pellet loss. Thank you all. Thank you all very much. Patrick?
Thanks, Dan. Great presentation. Being from DC, I personally love an acronym, so ZPL makes sense for me. So I am actually going to now hand this over. Rob, it is your turn to talk. Let me know when you'd like for me to advance your slides.
All right, great. Thanks. We'll go ahead and go to the next one then. All right, so for those of you that aren't familiar with Berry Global, we are a leading solutions provider for packaging and other protective solutions. We actually have close to 300 manufacturing sites around the world and reported roughly $13 billion in revenue pro forma last year. And you know, I think one of the key things for us is that we really, you know, we're just so diverse. We have, you know, we're #1 in film and sheet, which actually I say that, and when I submitted this slide, I think that was true. Full disclosure, I'm sitting here at my desk, and I got the latest plastics news that had us at #2 for film and sheet. So we're still #1 for injection molding, #7 for thermoforming, and #10 for blow molding based on plastics news rankings. And it just kind of shows that, you know, in Berry we have a tremendous amount of diversity, and that really, you know, I think ultimately drives a lot of our program and how we manage it. Go ahead, go to the next one, please. So just giving you kind of better idea of of where our sites are. You know, we have over 100 sites in North America, over 100 in Europe, and our total on 6 continents. You know, so we've really been domiciled in North America and in the U.S. We've relied on the plastics and ACC resources and have shared those globally. But we also benefit from getting some of that other information that the other organizations put together and share with us. So really, it's you know, it works out really well to have the different information flowing around, and ultimately the goal is always the same: 0 pellet loss, right, or 0 resin loss. Next slide. And before we really get into, you know, the nuts and bolts of it, I just want to give you a quick overview of our sustainability strategy, Impact 2025. We're focused on, you know, products, performance, and partners. We want to minimize our product impacts, minimize our operational impacts, and then maximize our positive impacts by engaging our partners on key issues. So if you think about Operation Clean Sweep, it's so important to us that we put it in our, you know, right in our strategy. It's one of our key pillars ultimately is Operation Clean Sweep. So on the operations side, you know, obviously we've committed to OCS and OCS Blue. You know, we want to prevent resin loss through OCS, and we've also said, gosh, you know, Berry is a big company. We've really grown by acquisition. So one of the things that we've said is we also want to work with those acquisition sites to make sure to implement OCS in the first year. Our most recent acquisition, RPC Group, we're very fortunate in the fact that they were similarly a global leader on all things sustainability, quite frankly, or in the plastics industry. So we've had a lot of great learnings from them on OCS. They'd already implemented OCS. But I'll tell you, some of our acquisitions had never heard of OCS. You know, so it's a range of things, and that's why we don't say oh, we need to be, basically every site, when you have that many sites, every site's a little bit different. So we have some high-level things that we drive down at corporate level, and then at the site level, we ultimately leave it to them for how to best implement some of these things. And before we leave this slide, I did want to point out one more thing on the partner side. Obviously, I just can't, I don't want to underemphasize how important I really believe this is for our industry. We've all heard about marine debris. We've all seen these horrible images. If we're going to have any credibility on marine debris at all, we have to be really good at Operation Clean Sweep. Because the resin, whether it's pellets, powder, or flake, that resin is 100% within our control. So we must control it, because our finished goods that go to the consumer and ultimately end up out of our control, it's really hard to influence those. That's not to say we shouldn't, but it's difficult, right? And so, whereas Operation Clean Sweep, that is something we can and should influence, and that's why I've really prioritized it ever since I first found out about it, quite frankly. Next slide, please. So one of the first things I want to really dig into is the awareness point, and this is something that Dan mentioned as well. Resin itself is fairly innocuous, right? Like, it's not a hazardous chemical. It's safe. You can touch it with your bare skin. So really the first step is that awareness of, hey, listen, this is, despite the fact that resin is relatively innocuous itself, we have to commit to not lose this resin. We have to prevent it from leaking. And anyone listening to this, anyone that's, and I haven't personally unloaded a rail car, but I've, been there while they've unloaded rail cars. I'm not trained in that. Safety first. It's really easy to spill resin, quite frankly. It's coming out with typically a pretty high velocity. It bounces. They're small. They can get everywhere. I found resin pellets in my lifetime. I found resin pellets in weird places. I won't get into all those stories, but with the awareness, I guess the key point is, I included a lot of different posters here, and that's because we have to maintain awareness, right? Like, if we just put up one poster and call it done, that's not our job. The job's not done. And quite frankly, posters alone aren't it either. As Dan mentioned, it really does get into a culture. But awareness is the first step, I'd say, of building a culture. And one of the things I want to point out here is, we start off in just English, and then we had English and Spanish, and then, now we have posters in Chinese, and actually Barry as a whole, and I, limited on space for the slide, but we actually have these posters in all of our languages for all of our sites around the world. We really, it's all about communicating to people in a manner that they can understand, right? So I just don't want to underemphasize this. And then the last point I wanted to make is, we've gone from solely relying on, posters provided to us by, plastics and ACC to actually now we've gotten to a point where we're even developing our own posters, like I said, in those various languages, et cetera. So awareness is very critical. Next slide, please. Then next, I'd like to talk about prevention, right? So prevention, obviously key. It's, they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and I 100% believe that. We would much rather prevent the resin from spilling than have to clean it up. Let's assume that whenever we have to clean up, we're not going to get 100%, and that's why I want to avoid cleanup. And here's a wide range of some of those kind of best practices we've shared. You could say that some of these aren't necessarily prevention, but containment. But regardless, when we're unloading, we primarily, in North America, primarily deal with resin in rail cars. In Europe, it's primarily in bulk truck. So we have those kind of different things already. But from the rail cars, we have a wide variety of pans or catch pans, et cetera, that people use to try to prevent that resin from spilling. A wide variety, as you can see on the left. That top right image, it's really one of my, I really enjoyed that one. We've used this one before, so you may have seen that image before. But, they actually put in this track to basically say, you know what, we don't want to rely just on the pan. We're going to put in this track that represents a secondary containment. A couple things I want to also point out on this slide. This top middle image is a silo probe screen. And one of our kind of issues that we found, and we'll talk about this a little bit more on the reporting side, but when you have a spill and you look at the root cause, these silo probe screens can wear out. you'll notice this is a probe screen that we installed. The initial one, the standard one, the stock one is quite frankly a very thin screen, a very flimsy screen that over time resin will wear out and wear a hole in. We've experienced this multiple times at multiple sites. And when you replace that screen, you have to take that silo out of commission and actually undo the piping, et cetera. But one of the things we found is you can put a screen over that screen that, guess what, it works just as well and doesn't require taking that silo out of commission. Below that, in the middle of this chart, that's perhaps not the very best image, but this is very, very simple Velcro band, this Velcro quick strap. We actually learned about this from a trucking company. Excuse me, take a drink real quick. One day we had a bulk truck unloading right here in Evansville at the headquarters, and we noticed that they had one of these Velcro straps on it, and we did similar, kind of. Once again, I'm going to break up the reporting. When you know where your spills occur and you have that data, you can track that data. If you've ever had these bulk trucks, rather than using vacuum, they use blowers. So vacuum, you're less likely to have a spill. I won't go into the whole detail of that. But with the blower, you're a little bit more likely to have a spill. And if basically there's so much vibration that the ears of that quick connect, the vibration can cause those to open up. And we've had this, we've experienced this, right? I'm sure many folks listening to this have probably experienced this as well. But this very cheap, low-cost Velcro quick strap that the gentleman was using that day, he's like, oh yeah, if we just put this on, never falls off. Oh my gosh, that's like the easiest solution. Very cheap strap, and just making sure that either the hauler or the driver uses it, or that we place it on there. But very simple thing that can, quite frankly, prevent over 1,000 pounds of resin spilling. Because if that quick connect did come off, if that coupler did come off, it would spill a lot of resin really quick. And then just the kind of the bottom two right pictures I want to share here. We've also had sites implement manifold systems to kind of get away from the manual handling with the vacuum ones. And the manifold systems are, if you're handling enough different types of resins that this could be useful, I highly recommend it. Obviously every site's a little bit different, but the manual handling tends to be where you spill the most resin inside the plant. And by going to a manifold system where you can pipe the silos and the day bins directly to the extruders, it reduces the manual handling so much. All right, next slide, please. So now we'll move to containment. And this is quite frankly pretty related to prevention in a lot of ways. But with containment, in my mind, these were the first ones were ones that it was the primary and this is secondary. But at any rate, a lot of quite frankly catch pans and screens, right? Like these were mentioned earlier on the webinar of catch pans and screens, and they're very important. With the top right, the hoppers. Hoppers can leak, right? Top, middle, silos. Unfortunately, I think we all know silos can leak. I addressed that on the previous slide. I've encountered many a leaky silo in my life, and when a silo leaks, it doesn't tend to be a major leak. Silos can leak just a little, just a few pellets, like a pellet a minute kind of thing. It can be a very small leak, and those are once again, you don't necessarily want to take a silo out of commission to replace a gasket, et cetera. So these catch pans are much more efficient. And one thing I want to say on the top left, so we don't, every site's a little bit different, right? But if a site wants or is interested in pursuing paving on their rail siding rather than the loose gravel, quite frankly, I do recommend paving. It's much easier to clean up. And one thing I want to point out is, and you probably can't tell it from this picture, but this the paving in that top left picture is sloped, so that should we spill any resin and not catch it, it would funnel to that the corner there where there's a screen in that grate that would then catch it. So the nice thing about pavement is it's so much easier to clean. The difficult thing versus rocks is, while the loose rocks are very difficult to clean, I also get a little bit of comfort knowing that since they're so difficult to clean, they're probably going to trap them there and not get into the broader environment. But that's another topic. And before we leave the slide, I just want to point out that bottom one. We love to call that one the witch's hat. So a metal screen obviously is going to be more durable, long-term use, but we also like those witches hats. Some of our sites have found a lot of good use with those, and we just love saying witches hat. Really fun to say. Next slide, please. And so the auditing, expect what you inspect. And I thought Don Graham, I thought he was the first person to ever say that because he was the first person I ever heard say that. And I thought it was a great quote. Apparently, everyone that's ever worked in manufacturing has probably heard a quote similar to that. So it probably wasn't a Don Graham quote, but ultimately, you need data, right? So if you have data on many spills, you're going to see which ones occur more often. And then you're going to start getting into root cause analysis. Or if you have, it just all comes down to data, right? If we say, hey, don't spill resin, but we never check, we don't know if we're spilling resin. We have to audit, we have to check. We really encourage sites, in general, if you're working manufacturing, probably someone at that plant is tasked specifically with doing a walkthrough for that day. That's generally been my experience in manufacturing. Include high-risk areas as part of your daily walkthroughs. And if you don't know where high-risk areas are, your daily walkthroughs will tell you, right? Like, where do you see resin? If this is a brand new program for you, you will know pretty quickly where the resin comes from. If you've implemented it and are trying to take it to the next level, obviously that can be a little bit more difficult. But I strongly recommend auditing these high-risk and as well as accumulation areas, and then tracking those results and really putting data to it to understand, one, the potential leak sources, and then two, how to address those. Next slide, please. And then reporting. I think that once again, that with the data, right? So audit to make sure the data is accurate, and then with the reporting, that's where you get the data. With OCS Blue, I'm not going to read you through this, but basically there is a reporting requirement with OCS Blue, and we encourage all of our sites. We have an internal system that we ask all of our sites to report any resin spills in. But reporting is critical, right? Like just like with auditing, it's expect what you inspect. You need that data. You need the data to drive good decision making. Next slide. And then share. One of the reasons I said yes immediately when they offered me the opportunity to join this webinar, as well as anything, I've generally said yes to everything regarding Operation Clean Sweep, because it is pre-competitive. If my competitor is spilling resin, is that, I don't want to get into that, I guess, but it's pre-competitive. We should all work with each other. It really is in all of our best interest to work together. And that sharing is, as I alluded to earlier, one of the ways that Barry has benefited from our acquisitions. We weren't necessarily, we've had a lot of acquisitions, and some have had some really great learnings and best practices, et cetera. So you see this diagram here is actually when we acquired RPC Group, which is now largely our Consumer Packaging International division. As I said, they were very active on Operation Clean Sweep, so they had a lot of these great resources that we were able to leverage and pull in. Next slide, please. All right, and then obviously cleanup is very important. Ideally, if you followed the previous steps, you don't have to clean up, but especially if you're new to a program, you might have some old historical resin spills, getting back especially to the rocks I mentioned on the rail siding. And you really need to have a clean base to start from, so you can very clearly say, oh, nope, that's new resin. And that new resin should stick out like a sore thumb. Everyone should see it and be embarrassed and want it to be cleaned up right away. Whereas if there's a big mess, you just add it to the big mess, right? That's one of the important aspects for cleanup. The other aspect I kind of want to talk about is this great knurl hunt. So there's a group in the UK, and they do work. They've expanded their efforts somewhat globally. If we don't take care of our own, unfortunately, this marine debris issue is a really large issue, and folks are becoming more and more aware of it, and they're looking upstream. There are folks, and it's not just in the UK. I know there's also a group in Texas that is working to search out these pellets, and shame on us if we let them find a pellet. The plastics companies, the plastics industry should address this issue so that other people don't have to and can't find pellets. Next slide. And one thing that's not directly related to resin cleanup, but since because of the timing, I did want to highlight our efforts here. Barry is participating in the All Together Global Cleanup, which is an initiative of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, of which Barry is a founding member. And we've actually, I'm actually really shocked at, we exceeded my expectations here. Our original goal was to pick up 100,000 pieces of litter. As of today, Barry employees have picked up over 230,000 pieces of litter around the world. Please, search for the hashtag altogether cleanup. You can see many of these images that that Barry or other Alliance members have contributed to. And anyone that is interested, I've had a lot of fun with this Literati app. They say it gamifies litter pickup, and it's true. So I encourage everyone to download the Literati app, and you can use code Barry-WCD to join the Barry cleanup that's going through another roughly a week, a little less than a week left to go. Next slide. And I want to make sure and emphasize that if we do these steps, if we actually care and try and put effort to it, we really can make progress. This chart's a little outdated, but this is actually a chart that I got from the Plastics Industry Association. And they got it from an organization called C. Obviously this is a little bit outdated, but it shows that in these expeditions where they do the marine trawling, basically they found less resin pellets over time. So it really does show that if we put our minds to it and we try, we can achieve these benefits. We can do it. Next slide, please. So in summary, the plastics industry can and should prevent resin loss. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Or excuse me, Rob. Not Dan. Getting all my slides mixed up. All right, so we are currently at the Q&A section. So we're going to bring everybody's videos back up, and we'll move to this slide. So again, we've had a few questions that have come through the Q&A. Please feel free to add your own, if you still have them. The first one that I'd like to answer actually is just kind of, I think, more general, which is about the recordings and the presentations and things like that. All of those will be available on the Operation Clean Sweep website. If you've registered for this or any of the other 3 webinars, or 2 webinars total, you will have access to those. We'll send you a link letting you know that those will be available on our website. We will be posting video excerpts, so not the entire hour-long, video at one time. We'll break them up so people can individually download the ones that they're most interested in, and then also slides will be provided as well where possible. So we've had a lot of really great questions come in. Let's start with this one, which I think is for Dan. Dan, what methods of cleanup or containment do you have for racking?
For racking, fortunately, all of our racks are obviously on concrete, and concrete that's secure, where there's no drainage. So it's indoors, and it is literally, it becomes immensely important that the moment that you see a single pellet leaking, that whether it's a box or a gator, get pulled out of the rack, addressed appropriately, then put back into storage. So that's the main thing. The pellets are going to fall on the ground and sweep them up. And I didn't say this in the presentation, but earlier on in manufacturing, floors were not necessarily kept clean. Well, if you had a pellet spill, automatically that pellet was wasted. You would have wood debris, dirt, whatever it might be, waste plastic mixed in with pellets. Well, now, obviously, keep your floors immensely clean, perfectly clean, and you'll be able to recapture that pellet. You won't lose that pellet. So that's what we really stress, is keep the floors clean in storage areas. That way, if you do have a spill, those pellets can route right back through reclaim operations, and you don't have a wasted asset.
Thanks, Ed. We have a few questions that are kind of all on this topic, so I'm going to try to combine them together, and I'll ask both of you in series for your response. So Rob and then Dan. But You know, how are you creating a positive sustainability culture? And then also, how are you keeping your employees enthusiastic about this? How are you continuing to keep them focused on you know, zero pellet loss, ZPL?
You know, that is a great question. From my perspective at the corporate level, I'm focusing once again on the awareness. So not just the posters, but you know, we send out occasional emails to make sure it does stay top of mind. And you know, and when I say emails, it's, you know, we send out communications to, quite frankly, all of our senior leadership as well as plant leadership. And you know, really, that culture comes from the top, right? So we really need to get to the individual plant and drive that culture at the plant. And I don't want to say that from a corporate level I'm driving that culture, but we're trying to give our plants the resources they need to drive the culture, and then we stay on the leadership to make sure that they're also reinforcing that message. But it's difficult when you have 300 plants to get it to all of them, quite frankly.
Dan, do you have thoughts on on culture?
Yeah, but I think sustainability and particularly Operation Clean Sweep principles are, we have handled them very parallel to safety over the last 7 or 8 years, where every single time we talk about manufacturing or a process, we talk about, of course, safety, but now we also talk about the pellet every single time. So it is woven into everything that we do. Our 5S programs from, from the Japanese programs, as well as our total productive maintenance, they're every single aspect of those programs. We also wrap in pellet control. So it is repetitive. It's got to be repetitive in nature, but it also has to be creative. The videos and the PowerPoints that our team across our group throw together make it an attractive story that the employees want to join in and work with us on.
If I could just build on that, and this is a point I made earlier, we really have to refresh assets, right? Like, you can't just do the same thing year after year after year. It's going to lose power over time. But refreshing those assets, even if it's the same message, just refreshing those assets really does help.
It's a good point, Rob. And I think that speaks to a question that we had asked, or we had someone ask about the posters that you presented in all the various languages. Some of those posters are OCS posters, and those are available on our resources page of the OCS website. Some of those are very specific, so use them, I would assume, for inspiration, but we don't have copies of those. Many of those are in different languages, and if you are interested in a specific language, please feel free to reach out to me. I can most likely put you in contact with the international partner that might be most relevant for either that language, whether they've translated it or they may have additional resources. And if not, then we can work together to get those things more accessible to more people. I do have it as 11:58, so we're going to need to start wrapping up. I think that we do have a lot of really great questions. Again, don't despair. We have copies of these, and so we'll make sure to either respond within our resources document or in some cases respond directly to you about your questions. So that's okay. With that, I would like to thank both of our speakers for taking time today to present to you and answer your questions. And thank you all for attending. As a reminder, please fill out the survey to make sure that you get a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar. As this is the last episode in the series, I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank the Planning Committee, El Brumley at Plastics, Stu Harris at ACC, and David Sandage. And then, we've also had over 370 people register for this one. Cumulatively, we've had over 450 people register for all three of our, webinars. And that's because many of you have shared our materials, and many of you who are international program partners have shared these with your networks as well. We could not have had that kind of success without your engagement and interest in that kind of spirit of giving. So thank you as well. Please feel free to, when we send all these things out, you'll have my email address. Please feel free to contact me, Stu Harris, or David if you have any questions about the program, any questions about the webinars themselves, or any feedback. So we're here to help you, as Dan has said, get to the goal of zero plastic resin loss. So thank you all and have a great rest of your week.